Good afternoon and welcome to the Dibble Institute's March 2025 webinar. I'm Kay Reed, the Executive Director of the Dibble Institute, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you all here today. You might be wondering why we're having this, this webinar in such interesting times. And frankly, we planned this webinar on federal grant writing back in the fall when it was forecast that the Healthy Marriage funding would be released in late February. And so we decided just to keep going because we thought this was really helpful information and will be again at some point in time. So first of all, so Erin, to the next slide. So thank you, Erin Larson, my colleague, for doing this webinar. If you can't hear us, really the best thing is to call in on your phone or exit and come back. But let me know in the questions if you have an issue. If you'd all go over and look at your hand there in the control panel, if you are new to a Dibble webinar, would you please raise your hand? I'd really like to know who's new for the first time. We've been doing these webinars since, I don't know, 2014, maybe 2012. I don't know, it's a long time. So, okay, well, a goodly amount of you, about a quarter, maybe a little bit more than a quarter, are new to us. So hello, everybody who's old to us, senior, as it were. Really pleased to have you here and welcome to the newbies. We hope you find it valuable and you find, like put this on every second Wednesday of the month just to come and hang out with us here in Dibble land. We do have one handout. It's also in the control panel, and so please take advantage of that. It's on the slides as well. And so the question that everyone asks is, will this be archived? And the answer is yes, it will be archived. And we will also include the handout with it. The chat, they're just joking for GoToWebinar about the chat. They don't mean it. If you have something to chat, write it in the questions box, and I'll be monitoring that. So a little bit about Dibble. We're not going to go into it as much as we normally do. This is Charlie and Helen, our beloved founders. Charlie was a fix-it kind of guy, really thought carefully about providing people with resources and tools to help young people learn how to have healthy, long-lasting relationships, particularly romantic relationships. And so it's in that spirit that we continue to provide resources and tools to our community and our clients and others. Next slide. So last year, by counting the number of binders we sell, which is how our economic engine turns, and our journals that we sell, we estimate that we reached almost 115,000 kids last year. And that doesn't count people who were repeats, might have been using it for a second or a third year, or reached more than 30 young people. So as most of you know, we're a nonprofit, independent national organization, but we don't do direct services. We count on people like you every day, reaching kids, doing the hard work, and for that, we are most grateful. Now, this is where we're going to deviate. Oh, next one. So we just had a staff retreat, and we have not so much revised as like clarified our mission or really synthesized it a little bit better, empowering youth and young adults with skills to build and sustain healthy interpersonal and romantic relationships. So that's our new quickie phrase on what the Dibble Institute does. And when I talk to people, I often say we help young people get smart about their love lives. So so those of you who know us know that, and those of you who are new, this is this niche that we are in. But I wanted to lead off this webinar with a few remarks before we get started, because I think lots of you have questions. So here in the Dibble Institute, we can agree on one thing. I think roughly 50% of our staff voted Republican and 50% of our staff voted Democratic. And I don't particularly, I'm not into people's political lives, except to say that when we met as a retreat group, and we met online as well, we can all agree that these are uncertain and chaotic times. But really the uncertainty is what's really unfortunate. And while we don't control what's happening to us, we do have it within our control to choose how to respond. And so that's, in some ways, that's a great comfort to think there are things we can do in response, both personally and as an organization, to stay steady and to move forward. So that's number one. Number two, we have no inside knowledge. I don't have a bat phone here that goes to Health and Human Services. So we don't have any knowledge that you don't have of the forthcoming grants, specifically the Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood grant. We assume, or I assume at least, that because this administration is very marriage friendly, very family friendly, that this grant will probably still be released. But it's anybody's guess, to be honest with you. So we don't know. But what we are thinking, and I've talked to others in the field, is that people are starting to look towards the states, counties, and cities for alternative funding. Will it be the same as the federal funding? No, but it's a good place to start. And so I would encourage you to sign up for your own state's, what do they call it, grant announcements. And sometimes they can get very, very granular, like I just want from Health and Human Services or Department of Human Services. In others, they're more broad, like I get one from the state of Pennsylvania. I live in California, and it's same thing, but here in California, I get like every single grant that they're announcing. But I think that's good practice to do. You also might look into where your state's TANF dollars are being spent, because there are some TANF dollars that are going for direct services to young people. And so you just might go down that happy little rabbit hole. We will continue in our monthly newsletter to highlight funding streams, new funding options, and we continue to look for those. And lastly, if you do have a grant and it is being impacted by some issue in the federal government, you always have an option to call your elected officials, your representative and your 2 senators. They have special staff that do this liaison work. And so if you are impacted, I would encourage you to reach out to them for a resolution. So finally, we at the Dibble Institute, or at least I, really love the book Good to Great in the Social Sector by Jim Collins. And a key concept in that book is what's called the Stockdale paradox. Admiral Stockdale was shot down in the Vietnam War and spent 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton, I think it's called, there in Saigon, as a prisoner of war. And when he was released, he said that he had noticed that people who were with him, who were eternal optimists, like we'll get out by April, we'll get out by 4th of July, we'll get out by Labor Day, whatever it was, often would end up giving up and dying. But that people who could hold 2 opposing views at the same time in their heads did the best. And the 2 opposing views that he had to hold was, one, it's horrible now here in the Hanoi Hilton. And secondly, it's going to be better. Someday it's going to be better. And so it's with that idea, with that concept in mind, that I encourage you to hold those 2 truths in your mind today. It's uncertain times, and it's going to get better at some point. So please, it's with that intent that we share this information today. So Aaron is going to be covering federal grants. You can see it only would have been better if you'd had the wicked, but no, no harm, no foul, Aaron. You can pop up now. But as he talks about these federal grants, remember, these are the same concepts to use when applying for a state grant or a county, local, or private grant. So I think it's information that can be widely used. And Aaron, I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you all.
Yeah, so thanks, Kay. So just to give a little bit of background about me, so as Kay mentioned, I'm Aaron Larson, the Director of Programs, but in a prior life, I was actually a federal employee. So I worked for the Administration of Children and Families back in 2002. I was brought on as a Family Assistance Program Specialist with a special emphasis in the President Bush's Healthy Marriage Initiative. And so I was tasked with creating a strategic plan to roll out this Healthy Marriage Initiative, and also to write the initial drafts of the Healthy Marriage Grant, as well as the Healthy Marriage Resource Center. And in doing so, the federal government spent a lot of money training me on how to write grants. One of the other opportunities that I had as well was there were a number of Healthy Marriage Grants that were going out of ACF at the time. And as a federal employee, these acronyms just like flow off the tongue. So ACF stands for the Administration of Children and Families. OFA stands for the Office of Family Assistance. And the reason why those two particular offices within HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, are important is because that's actually where Congress, for whatever reason, decided to house the Healthy Marriage Initiative, and the Responsible Fatherhood Grant was within OFA, Office of Family Assistance. And so at the time, ACF was rolling out a number of other healthy marriage grants with some of their other offices. And so I had the opportunity to also sit in on some grant review panels and get to kind of look behind the curtain, both in terms of how our grants written, but also how our grants selected and scored. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is some of those lessons that I learned in terms of what's behind the curtain of the federal grants. And more importantly, what you need to know in order to win. So as Kay covered this a little bit, I love this picture because it shows everyone looking around the crystal ball and wondering what in the world do we know about the Healthy Marriage Responsible Fatherhood grants. And so what I'm about to share is what's public knowledge, because that's all that we know. Like Kay said, we don't have a phone to the back cave back in the OFA. We don't have any insider information. In fact, when I worked for OFA, my boss drilled into me, if you share anything that is not public information, you can lose your job, you can go to jail, and the people who you shared it with are also in big trouble as well. So, but there are some things that we do know about the Healthy Marriage Responsible Fatherhood grants. So as of this morning, when I went to grants.gov, they are still up in the forecast. So that's a good thing. They haven't been taken down. The other thing that we know about the Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood grants is that the funding that actually that Congress has appropriated to fund these grants is not at all tied to the annual federal budget. So what you just saw passed out of the House and what the Senate is going to be voting on, I think either today or tomorrow, has nothing to do with the Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood funding, because it's tied to a separate piece of legislation, TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. And so that money is, at least for now, is safe. So the funding is available, but yeah, so don't worry about what's happening with the federal budget when it comes to that. With that said, if the federal government were to shut down, then obviously there are federal employees who need to be able to release the grants. And if they're not on the job, then the grants aren't going to be released. The other thing that we also do know is that there was an executive order a month or so ago that went out that paused all new federal grants until a political appointee could look them over. So if you go to grants.gov right now and look for, all right, what federal grant can I actually apply for that's active? It's a handful. I mean, I've never seen that few grants. And that's the reason why, is because there's this massive backlog of grants that's building up that's waiting for political appointees to look them over. So the other thing that we know that's public knowledge is that there is a political appointee who currently is at ACF. And so he has the opportunity, whether or not he's doing it, I don't know. But there's at least somebody there who can look over the grants for whatever they're supposed to look over them for. And so that's a good thing, because without the political appointee, then I could tell you it's not coming out until somebody looks it over. When it comes out, that is anybody's guess. It could come out tomorrow, depending on how quickly things happen, or it could be a couple of weeks, or it could be a couple of months. That we don't know. But what I also know is that you really need to be prepared to put your running shoes on, just in case it does come out, with a short window. And the reason why I say a short window is because in previous grant cycles, there was one Healthy Marriage Responsible Fatherhood grant cycle that I remember where they only gave people a total of 30 days to respond. So normally they give you 60 days to respond, but there was one time where they only gave you 30 days. So getting all of your ducks in a row is a really good idea, just in case this time becomes a 30-day instead of a 60-day. And that about covers everything that we know in terms of what's happening with the Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood grants, because I'm not going to pull out the crystal ball and start guessing. But these are all, this is all public knowledge, everything that I've just shared. The other thing that is important for you to understand in terms of the federal government and the three main funding streams, is just like with this beautiful picture that you see in front of you in terms of that water, there's usually a lot of water that comes out of the federal government that allows us to be able to do the great work that we're all doing to help young people to succeed. And there's three main forms of funding. So one of them is contracts. And right now, anybody who has a contract with the federal government is very uncertain, because with a contract, the federal government can cancel it at any time, they can change it at any time, and so that's one funding stream. The Healthy Marriage Responsible Fatherhood grants have never been a contract. So the other funding stream is an actual grant, and with a grant, you propose what you want to do, and the federal government says, that's a great idea, here's the money to go and do it, and they really can't force you to change anything about what you said you were going to do. The only way that it can be removed under normal times is if you are an underperforming grantee, because in the fine print, it does talk about that. And so you want to always make sure that when you write a federal grant, don't overpromise and underdeliver, because if you overpromise and underdeliver, your funding can actually be removed. So that's something to know about grants. And then the third funding stream is actually what's called a cooperative agreement. So there are a number of our clients who have grants, but in reality, they're cooperative agreements. And it's really important to know the difference between a grant and a cooperative agreement. So with a cooperative agreement, you tell the government what you want to do, and they say, yes, we want to fund that, and we want to come alongside you. And depending on the administration, and also just depending on how passionate they are about that particular topic, they could really, really come beside you and make requests of changes. And so you have the opportunity to either say, no, I don't want to make that change and walk away from the money, or you have to make the change. So it's good to know these three different types. We don't know for sure until the grant actually comes out if it's going to be a cooperative agreement or if it's going to be a grant, but just be aware those are some of the differences. Another thing that I highly recommend to everyone as soon as the grant announcement comes out, because you get super, super excited. I mean, you see some of the money that's available. So in the forecast, it says anywhere between $400,000 per year up to $1.25 million per year. And so as an organization, it's really easy to get excited about that. But before you spend too much time reading the grant, you want to try to figure out, are we even eligible to win? Because kind of like with Monopoly, I grew up playing Monopoly, and sometimes you got that little card that says, do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to jail. Well, in this case, you may find some fine print in the grant announcement that says that you're actually not eligible to apply. So you want to make sure that your organization is eligible to apply. And in the last grant cycle, they actually inserted something that disqualified a lot of organizations who previously had been applying, and some of them had even won. But specifically what it was is in the last grant cycle, they started to require that you needed to show that your organization had a certain amount of money. It was six figures, I think it was $100,000 or $200,000 passing through your organization every year, because I guess they must have been burned with some organizations who had not shown that they had the capacity to handle that much money. So they inserted that language. Whether or not that's going to be in the new grant announcement, that we don't know for sure. We'll have to wait until it actually comes out. But that, I would say, that's the first thing that you should always do before getting too excited, is make sure that your organization is eligible to even apply. And like I said, eligible to win. Okay, so what I want to do is I like using analogies and metaphors whenever I teach. And so today I'm going to be using this whole concept of, think of grant writing like building a house. And the reason why building a house is on my mind is because I'm currently DIY building a 5-story multi-generational passive ICF house. Like, I'm the one that's building it. And so this is a picture of the multi-generational home that I'm currently building. But writing a grant is a lot like building a house. So there's a lot of details that go into it. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. As Kay talked about, you need to be aware of what grants are coming out and then make the decision, do we even apply for this grant? Is it within our mission, or are we kind of doing mission creep to apply for it? So you want to make sure that you, just like we decided, took a long time to decide on this particular house, it's the same thing for figuring out which grant you want to go after. Another question that you need to ask yourself is, do you hire a grant writer? Or in my case, should we have hired a general contractor? And so when you hire a grant writer, it does make things a lot easier. However, there's still a tremendous amount of work that you're going to have to come along the side of your grant writer and do. So it's not just like you pull out a checkbook, hand over the check to the grant writer and they do everything. You're still going to need to do a lot of work, but it does make it a lot easier. And just like with the general contractor, you should also get references for the grant writer, talk with some of the people who have worked with the grant writer before, and also set your expectations. And the reason why I say set your expectations is because if any of you are baseball fans, you'll know that if a baseball player is hitting over, their batting average is 300, which means that every time they come up to the plate and they about 3 times out of 10 they actually get on base. It's actually kind of the same thing with grant writers. The fantastic grant writers win about 3 grants out of 10. And so you need to set your expectations that there's a potential that you could write the check and the grant writer could do a phenomenal job, but you may not necessarily end up winning the grant. So financially, you need to be in a position where if that happens, it's not going to be devastating. With that said, grant writers usually aren't tens and tens of thousands of dollars. It's not like we're talking about a $100,000 investment, but nonetheless, they're not free either. Also, in terms of grant writers, I know one organization who kind of uses a template, and with some of the people that they work with, so it's almost the exact same application, but sometimes it's just the roll of the dice that you end up with a bad grant review panel, and they have had some of their organizations not win, but other ones win. But the same thing with, I've actually never played craps, but if you don't roll the dice, there's no way that you can win. And so it's important to still go ahead and roll the dice. Okay, the other option is instead of hiring a grant writer or a general contractor to build it, the other option is, do you DIY it? And so this is actually me holding up my ICF blocks, and that's the home that I've actually put 1 million pounds of concrete in. And so yes, you save a lot of money. In my case, I've saved $175,000 putting in every single one of these blocks and filling them full of concrete. And it's the same thing with grant writing. You can save a lot of money by doing it yourself. However, you need to realize that you're going to need to make some significant sacrifices. So even before we broke ground, I have yet to take a vacation in the last 2 years, but work all weekends. Holidays, it's like, yes, I do the Christmas thing with the presents with the family, but then after that, on Christmas Day, I'm over working on the house. Same thing when it comes to grants, especially if you end up with that little 30 window grant writing window instead of the 60-day. But you need to be willing to make some sacrifices. That planned vacations are out the door. Holidays, it's out the door. It takes a lot of time to DIY it, but it's actually, for our clients, I would say the vast majority of our clients actually go the DIY route. And before the semi-truckload showed up of ICF blocks, I'd never picked up an ICF block ever before in my life. Same thing for some of the clients that I've worked with that have won grants. They had never seen a federal grant before they actually opened it up and looked at it and applied for it. And they have successfully won. So the reason why I chose this particular picture is because if you have never read through 100 pages of a federal grant announcement, or however long it's going to be, it's a little bit like deer in the headlights. It can be a little bit overwhelming to look at these federal grants. And so if you feel like that, it's okay, it's natural. It really is okay to be overwhelmed as you're reading through it. So on the left is the grant announcement. On the right, that's actually my structural engineering plans. And it's overwhelming to look at the structural engineering plans, and it's also overwhelming to look at federal grants. And that's an okay feeling. I love this little saying that the second grade teacher came up with, and she said, if something feels too hard to start, it just means that the first small step isn't small enough. And so I highly recommend take a screenshot. Well, we're going to send you these PowerPoints. Write down that little saying, put it on your computer, put it next to your desk so that when you do start to feel overwhelmed, you just need to make the first small step even smaller, because that's the only way that you're going to build a house like I've built or apply for a federal grant. Is you got to start with the small steps. The other thing that I'd recommend is you need to change your perspective about that grant. And what I mean by that is in our Mind Matters program, one of the things that we teach is when it comes to stress, you can either view stress as distress, which is very paralyzing, or you can change your perspective about stress and change your mindset to be one of eustress, which is actually very energizing. And so it's the same thing with this grant announcement. Instead of looking at it as distress, look at it as eustress, because the federal government actually gives you the scoring rubric on how they're going to score your grant. I mean, it's like being given the answers to all the test before you even have to take it. So it's really a very nice tool to have as long as you learn how to read it correctly and respond to it. And the other analogy that I like to use is look at the scoring rubric. Like back in the day, you had the paint by numbers. That it used to be a big thing and a lot of fun. But it told you put blue in number 1, put red in number 2. And when you got done, you had this beautiful painting. Same thing with the scoring rubric. Do what they tell you to do, how they tell you to do it, and it really is a little bit more like paint by numbers. So what are some of the keys to success? So the keys to success as far as, so this is me up on about the 5th level. So the roof, I'm putting in the roof right now. But these were some of the keys to success for me building this house, and they also apply to federal grant writing. So number 1 is you need to assemble a team. 2, follow the blueprint, or in this case, the scoring rubric from the grant announcement. Use the right tools, and then take it one block at a time. Because what you see there, I stacked 99% of the blocks. Sometimes I'd have little kids, friends and family, they'd stack a block and put their names on it, and it was fun for them. But same thing with grants, you just take it one block at a time. So in terms of assembling the team, this is a picture of the team that helped me with one of the concrete pours. We had just gotten done pouring 200,000 pounds of concrete. But you need to assemble your team for applying for the grant. And part of assembling your team is getting your partners who are going to be able to help you to gain access to the young people. Get them in place now. Don't wait for the grant announcement to come out. You can take the grant forecast to them and show them that this federal money is coming out. We're going to be able to make a significant impact and difference on young people's lives. Share with them some of the outcomes from our Dibble programs so that they can understand that this actually does make an impact on the outcomes that they're also interested in. Get them on board beforehand, because I don't know if you've ever worked with a school district before, or even sometimes with community-based organizations, but getting an MOU in place takes a long time. And if they're only giving you 30 days to respond and you don't have your MOUs already basically signed and in place, it's going to be very difficult to pull that off. So start assembling your team right now. Sometimes usually in the past, one of the members of the team that they require is an outside evaluator, or depending on how the grant is written, if you have the expertise internally, then that might work as well. But you want to make sure that those slots fill up pretty quickly. So you may want to start looking at outside evaluators if you decide to go that route. And then the other thing that I recommend is read the grant, or in my case, the blueprint, over and over and over again. You want to know it forwards and backwards before you ever put your pen to paper. or in my case, starting to build the house, because that really is your key to success, is not missing anything. When it comes to these federal grants, sometimes the difference between winning the grant and losing the grant is 1 point. And I can tell you the vast majority of the people who are winning the grant are scoring in like the 98, 99 range. So they're only missing maybe 1 point in being able to win the grant. If you're in the 95 and below, you may not necessarily win. So you want to be able to get every single point. You don't want to miss out on any of those points. You want to know that grant forwards and backwards. I kind of smile when I with this particular slide, because normally I would never say it's okay to plagiarize. None of us look good in orange. It's one of Kay's favorite sayings. We don't look good in orange. And when it comes to plagiarizing, it's not okay to plagiarize somebody else's grant. It's not okay to plagiarize from other sources. But there is one place where it absolutely is okay to plagiarize from, and that's from the grant announcement. And the other thing that I'm going to say too, sometimes you're going to hear me say NOFO and FOA. So NOFO stands for Notice of Funding Opportunity. FOA stands for Funding Opportunity Announcement. I'll interchange that language. But it is okay to plagiarize from the NOFO. So here's the reason why. Here's a behind the curtain tip. You want to make life as easy as possible for the grant reviewers. I've sat on the grant review panels. You end up with a stack of, and it totally depends on the agency, but it can be anywhere between 4 to 6 different applications. That's 400 to 600 pages of information that you're having to look through. And you're not given weeks and weeks to do this. You're given a small amount of time. So you want to make life as easy as possible for the grant reviewers. So when I say plagiarize, especially in the points section of the grant, you want to don't get cute, or in the house building, don't try to re-engineer things. With the scoring rubric, you want to use the exact same language, plagiarize it, lift it, so that when the grant reviewer, because that's the scoring rubric that they're using to decide how many points to give to you. So if they say XYZ, then you say, we're going to do XYZ by doing ABC. So you want to use the exact same language. Another thing that I'd recommend is bolding. Every single time that you lift language from the scoring rubric, bold it. Make it super easy for the grant review panel to be able to quickly find the points. I've sat on panels before where we had one person who was like, no, they didn't cover that. And the rest of us were like, yeah, they did cover it. Well, what page? And then we're having to scramble to find which page that they covered it. If you have the scoring rubric language bolded, that makes it a lot easier for the grant review panelists to give you full points. Also, sometimes, I mean, initially when you sit down, if you've never written a grant before and you're like, oh, I've got 50 pages to respond, and you're just going and going, I've got plenty of space. You're going to find very quickly that when you are having to respond to everything that they want you to respond to, 50 pages gets used up very quickly. And so, but sometimes, and some of the things in the scoring rubric are repetitive, and that kind of drives me nuts. But it is, and so you may want to use the little tool of saying, I covered XYZ language from the scoring rubric on page 52. Sorry, not 52, because that's going to be cut off. Page 48. And so, yeah, make sure that you make life as easy as possible for the grant reviewers to find the information to give you full points. Another tip that I would give you in terms of tools is harness the power of AI. So this is kind of a newer thing, but if you use it correctly, it can be incredibly powerful. So you can feed, you type up your rough draft, give it to AI and say, I want to make this more concise. And it can take, and you can say, I need to, especially if you're running into the page limit, you can say, I need to get this under 50 pages, Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced, and AI will do it. You'll want to obviously double check the AI, because that is one of the weaknesses of AI right now, is that sometimes it just makes stuff up. So it's always good for human eyeballs to be looking over it, but Don't be afraid of harnessing the power of AI to make your case more compelling, because you can also tell it, make this language more compelling, to make it more concise. And then you can also take the grant announcement as a file, and then you can take your application as a file. You can feed them both into AI, and then you can ask AI, please score this and give me feedback on how it can be improved. So that's another possible way. They also now have AI that is specifically designed to help people to write grants. That's a little bit more pricier, but it's something else to possibly consider. Now, with that said, yes, I did just recommend to have AI score it, but also it's really important to have real people review it too. You need to leave yourself enough time for the real people to review it and for you to make the changes. So one nice thing about AI is it will actually do all of that scoring process in less than 10 seconds. It's remarkably fast. People are not as fast. So I would recommend leaving at least a week or so, if you can, so that you're not scrambling at the end, to have real people review it and leave yourself enough time to implement their suggestions. Also, in terms of who you have review it, don't have people who've been working on the grant announcement review it, because they're just too close to the situation. It's easy for them to just in their mind go, oh yeah, no, we covered that. Whereas somebody with fresh eyes is like, no, I don't see it anywhere. You didn't cover it. So highly suggest that you have real people review it. Okay, another behind the curtain tip, and that is points matter a lot. So when I was writing the Healthy Marriage Grant, I actually ended up sitting down with the Assistant Secretary of ACF, and he let me know what the priorities were for him and for the administration in terms of what was most important to them about the grant. And then I was instructed to put points behind those things that were most important to them. So when you look at the scoring rubric, it actually breaks it down into sections in terms of how many points are associated with the different sections. So for example, if the budget isn't that important to them, then they may just put 5 points. But if another section or another specific concept is really important to them, they'll put more points there. And so here's one of my tips in terms of dividing up your pages is, if something is worth 25 points out of 100, then if you've got 100 pages to work with, I would dedicate 25 pages to that particular thing. Whereas some people are super excited about their budget, and that's wonderful. But if it's only worth 5 points and you dedicated 10 pages to explain what an amazing job you guys are going to do on the budget, you just shot yourself in the foot, because the grant review panelists can only give you a total of 5 points, and 10 pages, you're wasting your time. School of Hard Knocks. So as I can't remember if I mentioned it, but I'll mention it now. So with the Dibble Institute, I've been with the Dibble Institute coming up on 12 years in April. So next month, it'll be 12 years. During that time, I've worked with hundreds of clients who have applied for federal grants. And there have been some very, very sad experiences that I'm going to share with you in the hopes that you don't end up repeating them. So there's one person that I know who spent over 100 hours working on their grant application. They submitted it 1 minute past the deadline. That 1 minute cost them 100 hours of their time, because when it comes to the federal government, they don't care if your internet went down. They don't care that there was a storm. If you don't submit it before that deadline, even if it is 1 second past the deadline, then your application will never be looked at. And in his case, it was a very, very sad thing. Also, in terms of page limits, I can remember one client calling me up and saying, I don't get why the grant review panelists didn't give me full points for XYZ. And I said, well, did you included it in the application? She was like, yeah, it was on page 53. And I said, but you only had 50 pages to work with. Yeah, I know, but I thought, and then she explained, she's all, well, we had some extra resumes and things that we needed to put in. And so I thought it would be okay. Well, I can tell you right now, it's not okay. The way that it works is first your application goes to this third party, and they literally cut off They don't even print out the pages if it's beyond the page count. And so you will miss out on points if you have too many pages because the grant review panelists are never going to see it. Another school of hard knocks, this one fortunately kind of worked out. And that is one of the things that I always recommend to people is if there is language in the program announcement, in the NOFO, that says that you can submit the application multiple times, but only the last application will actually be scored, take them up on that offer. Minimum a day before the grant is due, submit what you have. If you want to continue polishing, fine, knock yourself out, polish it 10 more times, but at least you'll actually have something that has been submitted. Another school of hard knocks is I had one client who they did their math correctly, but the grant review panelists didn't. And so when you put numbers into a calculator, if you put them in backwards, then you can get the wrong answer. And so the grant review panelists actually put the numbers in backwards. So you want to show your work. Another school of hard knocks was, and this was actually a healthy marriage grant. A number of grant cycles ago, they said, OFA said, you have to buy tablet computers, and you can either buy a Apple tablet computer or an Android tablet computer. So this particular organization chose the Apple to go with the Apple tablets, and but the grant review panelists were like, you went with a more expensive option, they docked them with points. And so if you have that opportunity, always justify whatever you're doing, lift the language directly from the program announcement saying that you can do it so that you don't end up with that. So anyways, I hope none of you end up with stories from my school of hard knocks in the future. Your project summary might matter a lot. And the reason why I say it might matter a lot, with your project summary, it's usually just one page. They do allow you to single space it. You want to make a very, very compelling case that the vision that the office has set forth in the program announcement is the one that you are super excited and that you have the capacity to implement. I say that because sometimes it comes down to just 2 or 3 applications that they're having to decide on. These decision makers, they don't have time to read all the application, all 100 pages of each application. They're basing a lot of their decisions off of your project summary. So spend a lot of time making that project summary a very compelling case that you're going to be carrying out their vision, because that may end up proving to be the difference on whether or not you win. And then my almost last slide is, I chose this particular one because there is a famous saying from Wayne Gretzky that I absolutely love. And he said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And so while I cannot guarantee that you will win this particular grant if you apply for it, there was one grant a couple of years ago where I was able to guarantee people. I was begging people to apply for the Title V California money, because every year the feds were having to just send it back to the Treasury because not enough people were applying for it. Those days are gone. It's now a competitive grant. But with the Healthy Marriage Grant, it's very competitive. The Responsible Fatherhood Grant is very competitive. I cannot guarantee that if you apply and do the most amazing thing that you're going to win. But there's one thing that I can guarantee, and that is if you don't apply, I guarantee you're not going to win. And so like Wayne Gretzky said, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So to help you increase your chances that when you do apply, that you'll win, is we've actually put together a preliminary Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood Healthy Relationship Grant Toolkit. And I say preliminary because obviously until the grant announcement comes out, we can't do all the little special bells and whistles on how we correlate what the grant wants to our programs. But right now we have put some stuff up. One of the things that we have that's very useful is we have the prior grant announcement. And when I was working for the feds, the way that it worked was you were given a copy of the prior grant announcement and then you made changes to it for the new grant announcement. So there's a really good chance that they're still using that same approach, which means that the prior grant announcement is probably going to look pretty similar to the one that's going to be coming out. I can't guarantee that, but it's probably going to look pretty similar. So to at least become familiar with what they wanted last time will help you. Also, we have the Healthy Marriage, Responsible Fatherhood slide deck. Seth Chamberlain just recently did a webinar where he talked about everything that he could talk about, gave some fantastic insights. You can download that slide deck. You can also sign up for our emails regarding any of the updates. So as soon as the grant comes out, we're going to let you know, and then we'll also let you know when our toolkits are available. You can also schedule time to learn more about this funding with us, and you can email us with any questions. And so I have left us with some time for questions. So, Kay.
Thank you, Aaron. Nice
Me?
job. Yeah, don't we know why every applicant loves Aaron? We have the Aaron Larson fan club. So while there's several on AI, I want to start with when there's something in the FOA that says what they want, but it's not in the scoring rubric, how would you handle that? Do you still include it?
100%. So, and here's the reason why, is because twofold. One, the decision makers put that in there for a reason, because they want you to be responsive to it. Also, on the grant review panel, one of the things that you're looking at is, were they responsive to the entire NOFO? And so grant review panelists can mark you down if you were not fully responsive. And so yes, that was one of the things that on the other side of the curtain drives me nuts, is we should only be responding to what's actually in the scoring rubric, but the reality is you want to be responsive to everything. And that's why using AI to help condense things, make things more concise, is going to be your friend, so that you can stay within that 50-page limit.
So now we're going to unload the onslaught of AI questions. So is it ChatGPT or is it something else? Or, what are you recommending for an AI friend?
Yeah, so if you do use ChatGPT, I'd say go ahead and bust out your wallet, pay the $20 a month to use the more advanced version, the one that actually is pulling from more current information. There are, I'm not familiar with all of them, but there actually are specifically for grant AI. Those usually are significantly more expensive than $20 a month. But if you are new to grant writing, it actually might be helpful to go ahead and splurge. I guess the other way to look at it is you can either pay an expert in terms of a grant writer, or you can pay the grant AI, which is kind of like the step down, or if you don't have a lot of funds, or if you're confident in your abilities, then you can just go with the ChatGPT. I have found it is crazy impressive on how it can condense 5 pages down to 1 page and really capture the essence and do a much better job. It would take me many, many hours to condense 5 pages down to 1 page, and ChatGPT does it in 2 seconds.
So there's a program called Grantable, which is the AI for grants. And I think they have a free version. I know I used it to help me do some writing a few grants ago. So, and it probably has more loaded in, like powerful words and passionate things. I don't know, but either one will, I'm sure, do fine. Okay, so we went through the AI. Would you just restate the 3 flavors of grants? That seems to be a...
Yeah. So there's contracts. I'm 99.9% sure that responsible fatherhood and a healthy marriage is not going to be a contract. The 2 that it could be, in the past, it's always been a grant. You tell them what you're going to do, and they say yes or no, and then that's what you do for the next 2 years. For the next 5 years is what it's been in the past. Can't guarantee it's going to be for 5 years. And then the third option is what's called a cooperative agreement, where you tell them what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and they say yes or no, and then they say, and we're going to come alongside you. And sometimes them coming alongside you is totally fine, and they are hands-off approach. But you just need to be aware that they could come alongside you and be very, very involved in your in what you do. So
Right.
I only say that so that you can have your eyes wide open, and so that you're not shocked if that happens. Most of the time it doesn't happen, but it could happen. So you need to be aware of it.
Right. Yeah, so I know of people who take the PDF they get of the grant, they turn it into Word, and then they look for the words must, will, and highlight those sections. It's crazy making, but worth it. So that as you're to Matt's question, are you just responsive to the scoring rubric, or do you do the bigger picture? One way to get a perspective of what is required, which would be implied or said by the words must and will. That's another hot tip to make it, not that it makes your grant writing any easier for sure, but it will focus you on what's the most important things, because there are lots of things that they'll say should or maybe can, whatever. So, I mean, the things based on the legislation of this grant, the youth portion can go down to high school, 9th grade. I think rising 8th graders or 9th graders, but it's not an elementary school grant. It's not a middle school grant. And like Erin said, I can't emphasize enough, especially now where school administrators are only partially crazed, to reach out to places you might want to do activity for this grant and get them on board, because the minute the grant, even if you have a full 60 days, it's still not much time to like go make a new best friend and get them to trust you and know. So really tomorrow, meet with your team, figure out what your grant activity might be. And then the next thing to do is go out and talk to those people. Because once this end of let's say this comes out in May, well, every school administrator is crazed in May and, their hair is on fire. You're not gonna be able to get a hold of them. So also, youth settings, they're a little more probably, so the nice thing about schools is, where the kids are, or settings where kids don't have much of a choice, right? So that would mean corrections, that would mean schools. You can get this last grant, I think they required a 90% compliant completion rate, 90%. So if you're at the Boys and Girls Club, as much as we love Boys and Girls Clubs, sometimes it's hard to make kids want to come. You have to like give them lots of incentives to make sure they come all the time. So, you think about your how you're structuring your grant, meaning, or your activity, like people who work with really high risk populations might do and then the grant has something to say about that. I was just going to say some grants have allowed people to instruct kids over 2 weekends and boom, boom, you're done. And so that you can really keep track of them. But I think in this last marriage grant, you had to do it over 4 weeks. So it's not as easy. But you might think about systems in your area where you could reach kids easily. So systems, child welfare, maybe youth build or Job Corps, schools, and again, lean into the relationship. Okay, is it an advantage to have an evaluation team that has previously worked with OFA funded projects and who have published their evaluations in scholarly journals?
Yeah, so what I would say is it totally depends on the grant announcement. So if they give points, if those are specifically things that they are looking for in the scoring rubric, then yes. And then there's also kind of a side yes, in that usually the grant review panelists want to see that your evaluation team has experience. And so I would call that the benefit of the doubt points. So if a grant review panel is looking at not look, because they can't compare it to other applications, but if they're looking at your application and they can clearly see that your evaluation team is experienced, are going to be able to do a fantastic job, then they could give the extra benefit of the doubt point. But I would say wait until the grant announcement comes out to see just how critical that's going to be.
They want to reduce their risk. That's what the feds want.
Correct.
They want to make sure that you're going to do what that you have. That's why they ask, like, what's your agency's track record? Who's running the program? Because they want to see that if they invest this funding, that it's not going to blow up for them. That what you say you're going to deliver is going to be delivered. And so likewise with your who you have as your evaluator. These are not evaluation grants. They're really just like, did kids respond? How well did they, it's not a technical grant, evaluation grant, but it doesn't hurt to have a really great technical team evaluation on that.
And I would say I'd say with a caveat, Kay, and that is in the last grant cycle, on the lower end of the amount of money, it was very much not an evaluation grant. But if you
Right.
wanted if you wanted the $1 million plus grants, then it actually was required to do a rigorous evaluation with an RCT, and they did expect that. But
Right.
the lower end money, not an evaluation grant.
Somebody asked about the range, how much to apply for. And in the last funding, I recall there were 3 tiers of funding. And so they
Correct.
really wanted new organizations to just get a little money and more experience to have some money, and then big major organizations who could do a study to have more money. So I want to apologize to the person who just put in a question about refugee resettlement grants. And I put it in the trash. I'm so sorry. Can you rewrite your question and we'll answer it? I apologize. Okay, I'm gonna,
Yeah, they were actually one of the other offices that was close to where I was at.
yeah. So, we don't know. People have asked me, what do we know about what's going on in ACF? And we know everything right? Which is not much. So sorry, I wish we could provide more insights. Okay, so if I were Aaron Larson, I'd have a slide that came up right now. Well, how do we move to the next slide? I'd have a slide that would have a picture of a bag and a cat. Oh, so by the way, so we'll put this on our website. We'll put it on our page for the toolkit. And if you sign up with us, we'll keep you informed. We'll be reading the grant along with you. We'll provide all the tools, theory of change, crosswalks, whatever it is, to help you write a strong grant. So, and then Aaron was happy to talk, as you can tell, about grants about anybody. So we can also set up a call for you. There won't be a replay, but we will. Oh, I want to apply for unaccompanied refugee minors program. Thank you, Kim. Oh, good for you. I mean, I don't know if there's a question there, but this is not just about the Healthy Relationships Grant. I mean, that's the one that we see coming out first or next, or hopefully soon. But these kind of insights can go for any grant, for sure. Okay, so we'll have this archived. You can look at it all you want in the next couple of days. Okay, next one. So this is where I have my slide with the cat and the bag, putting something out of the bag. So the Dibble Institute is pleased to announce, and you are the first people to know this, that we have a new program we'll be releasing in mid-April called Project With. And it is a relationship skills program specifically for youth in care, system-involved youth, both in corrections and in child welfare. And it's using, for those of you who've been around here a little bit, the project, the Art of Loving Well project, but it's based on stories about relationships, friends, families, romance, and marriage. What they found with excuse me, an impact study was that the young people, mostly young men in confinement in corrections, were more able to plan for the future, which is a huge deal. So stay tuned. I can't say much more about it at this point, but the next webinar, which is April 9th, will be with the author, John Lewis, to talk about the program, and we'll be sending out some information in advance of that. But we hope if you're, working with youth in care, that it'll meet a need you have to really, connect with these kids, because they just, very special, and they need special tools to reach them. So we're super happy about that. Okay, let me see if there's any other. We have 2 more minutes. Oh my gosh. Oh, thank you. 2 applicants apply and both get it from the same area. I don't know if that's a question, but Aaron, don't you think that the final decision on grants is a political one, right? So they might say,
yeah, so
we can't have 14 grants in California, right?
So I can tell you, well, I can tell you that I do know of a number of, especially larger cities, where they do have multiple grants that were assigned to the same city. I also know in this last grant cycle that organizations could actually win a responsible fatherhood grant and a Ready for Life grant. In other grant cycles, they said you can't win both. And so we're just going to have to wait and see how rigid they're going to be when it comes to if you can apply for 2 separate grants. But unless you are in a small little town in Wyoming and you have 2 organizations that are applying for it, I really wouldn't worry if you're in a larger metropolitan area about some other organization also applying for a grant.
So how many, April's wondering, how many people are historically served like in a moderate scope grant?
Yeah, so the way that the rule of thumb is if you're asking for $400,000, be sure that you're serving 400 youth. If you're asking for $1 million, you're going to need to be serving more than 1,000 youth per year. More is better, and it also depends on how much job training that you're doing, because the Ready for Life grant went up to age 24. So if you're serving really hard to reach youth or doing a lot of job training, that's obviously significantly more expensive than just teaching relationship education in a school. So as long as you can justify it, you're okay. I do know of organizations who have won serving small number of youth who are really hard to reach, very expensive, and job training. So make the compelling case.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Healthy Marriage Grants last time, Healthy Relationships did require some kind of job training. And also, I mean, it could be a light touch, doesn't have to be, or a connection to the WIOA office. Also required case management. I mean, read what they did last time. And that's the best thing. I mean, we don't know what they're going to say this time. Are there grants for teen parents? You can use this funding for teen parents, the Healthy Marriage funding. But there's not, to my knowledge, specific teen parent funding right now.
Yeah, not a set aside.
But I know states, I don't know what state you're in. Let's see, was that? Anyway, I lost that dot, sorry. Is it 400 youth over 5 years or annually? I think the answer is annually, correct, Aaron?
Annually,
yeah.
Correct.
So
yeah, that's the rule of thumb.
The other tip is, you might want to, it's going to take time to ramp up. These grants are going to be released on October 1st, and so, to get into classrooms or to get to your Boys and Girls Club, it's going to take some time to ramp up. So they often give you a 3-month kind of runway, right, to get going. So you might, as you consider your funding, say, well, the first year we're going to reach 300 because it's going to take us some time to get the plane off the ground, or we've missed the fall semester. And then, but the next 4 years will be at 400 or we'll be at 450 because we have this great thing. Now, the Dibble Institute has a very promising practice called Teachers Are Cost Effective, TACE, where we benchmark classroom teachers who are already paid to do the work, but we benchmark them for reporting. And if you work with family and consumer science teachers who have this in their curriculum, you don't have to hire your own staff except to coordinate the program. And it's a great way to reach lots of kids. I mean, I did the program like this in Los Angeles County, and we were reaching 6,000 kids a year, easy. And if we'd had more money, we could have reached more. So, if you have those questions, let me know. kreed@dibbleinstitute.org. Let's see, who else? Oh my gosh. Are you saying it's serve at least one per $1,000 a year?
Basically, it's chop the zeros off. If you want $500,000, then minimum plan on serving 500 kids in generically. $750,000, 750 kids. That's the rule of thumb, but you're going to need to justify what you're doing. And but yeah, that's kind of the general rule of thumb of what I've seen of people that have won.
Yeah, and what was I going to say? Oh dear, sieve brain again. Yeah. Oh, I know. This administration has some. When I read Project 2025, does talk about cost per unit served. So I think in more, this administration more than others will be very carefully looking at, like the early marriage grants. It sounded like so much fun. Took adults to a beach resort for a marriage retreat over a weekend. Whew. And they come to conferences and say, like, we're at capacity and we've served 300 couples, and we have $1 million, and that's not going to fly this time. And it didn't fly it only flew the first time. But anyway, yeah, so just be strategic about what you can actually deliver. And that's why if you would like contacts to your local family and consumer science group, I'd be happy to provide those. To Demetria, who wants to know what they're doing in Georgia. I think there's another webinar on our website about other kinds of funding. States have PrEP funding and Title V funding, which can be used with teen parents, and they go through your state. Every state administers them differently. So you might cruise our website, or maybe Kim, you might take a note and we can add that that webinar to our email that we send out. Okay, well, we've kept you past class is out. Time to go to recess. So thank you, Erin. As always, great contribution to the field. For those rest of you, thank you for showing up, and we'll see you next month when we get to look at Project With, which we're super excited about. Thank you. Bye-bye.